Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Cenerelli. I'm a senior technical writer at Google, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to work with API technical writers. So, given that we're in the world of AI, I asked Bard, now Gemini, tell me a joke. Give me a good joke for documentation. And this is what I came up with. So, kind of funny, but to the point of, trying to use a tool without documentation is super hard, and it's time consuming. And so this is what we need. This is why we need technical writers, and this is what I'm going to talk to you today. So a little bit about me. I've been a tech writer for about 9 years. I was a programmer before that, so I've seen both sides of the SDLC. And then right now I work for Google as a senior technical writer, mostly working with Google Workspace APIs. So those are our doc sheets, slides, drives, APIs, Google Meet. So I'm working more with productivity and collaboration tools. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why you need a technical writer, why I feel you need a technical writer, how to plan a doc project, what to expect during that project, and then some things to avoid when working with a technical writer. So I am assuming, since you're all here at an API conference, you know what technical documentation is, but some people don't know why they need them or why they need a technical writer. So this is my portion of the program where I'm going to try to persuade you to hire more technical writers and to use technical writers on your team. So this question often gets kind of brought up, but then kind of glossed over. So this is why I wanted to bring it to the fore. So if you had developers who had to use your API without documentation, could they do it? How many engineering hours would be wasted? Could they plow their way through your API and kind of figure it out if there was no technical documentation through trial and error? Developer experience through your API is through your docs, and people can't use the API without it. In fact, if you consider with no UI available, your public-facing documentation is your product. That is your API product. So this is a way for you to kind of start thinking about your API documentation of how you're going to present yourself to the world. So another way to kind of look at this too is one engineer plus one tech writer. Will it reduce engineering costs? I'm going to say yes, but there's also some stuff that you need to think about. Not just reduced engineering costs for your team, but for your users, for other teams, for people using your products. At Google, we did a little kind of DevOps report here, and one of the things we discovered was that with good quality documentation, there's a 12.8 times impact on development and trunk-based development. In the same report, there was also new hires on teams were 130% as effective as people who had poor documentation when those 130% of new hires actually had excellent documentation. So they were able to get up to speed, get up and running very quickly. So my continued process here of, do you really need a technical writer? You probably are thinking, well, we have somebody on the Eng team who's creating the documentation, or maybe it's your PM or somebody and who's creating some sort of documentation right now. But technical writers have years of experience writing documentation. They understand what the users need. They can craft that documentation. They know how to organize and get that info out to the users. They can make the content user-friendly, simple, concise, and with consistent tone and voice. You have an important job to actually draft and create the API. Let us create the documentation while you're actually working on the nuts and bolts of the API. So the other thing we're going to talk about here is tech writers are user advocates. So what that means is we actually understand the pain points of the user. We can get into the user's shoes. We can understand what they're actually going through and the content that can specifically address those users' needs. So we can also point out things like concept gaps, content gaps, extraneous information. Maybe there's assumed knowledge in your documentation, too many acronyms, but people don't know what they are, or extraneous information that may be distracting readers. Maybe things are all plowed into one document when they should be split out into several. We can also push back if there's a roadblock. If we think that users are not going to understand something, we can actually put a stop to the process and help you kind of work through that before you get going again. So this is all kinds of things that we can kind of do. We'll also give feedback on UI messages and maybe error text and all of that. An example from real life is actually something I was doing this morning. Google API writers are expected to know what's called the AIPs. This is an open source design document that Google's created, and it's called the API Improvement Proposals. This is a great way of drafting your documentation, your API documentation, your APIs in general, within a consistent way. So there was actually something that was broken this morning, and I referenced over to the AIPs and said, hey, have you thought about this? This is something we need to do. They were super helpful and super appreciative that I did that. So that's just one way that technical writers can kind of help the engineers create a consistent workspace and workflow for your APIs. So the other thing that tech writers do, we can leverage big picture thinking. So there's very few people within an organization that can actually see the bigger picture of not only your APIs, but of your actual productivity space. So we can articulate that big picture, and we can do it through several ways. Detailed product overviews. So what your product is trying to do, the pain points it's trying to solve. This is the journey that somebody would go and try to work through your product and say, okay, what is it that I want to do with your product? We can explain that from end to end. The other thing we can do is we can talk about developer journeys. So a developer is going to need to come to your docs, and we're going to be able to explain how to work with that product. So we're going to be able to tell you, yes, you're going to need an API key. You're going to need OAuth. You're going to need to go through all this. Here's how you're going to troubleshoot. Here's how you're going to launch, and here's how you're going to publish your API. We're one of the few groups of people within the organization that can walk a developer from start to finish all the way through that process. We can also talk about, too, cross-system workflows. So not just actually within the API, but perhaps your API needs to reach out into third-party products, or maybe a 2P product that's internal to your domain. Maybe you want to reach out into those. So we can kind of help you connect those dots and get that process going. A lot of these cross-system workflows are really great for two groups of people: managers who don't have a lot of time, and newcomers to the organization who haven't been ramped up yet. So that's a couple of groups that we can actually kind of help out and get on their feet. Technical writers can also consider the integrated API data. And what that means is that you're going to have multiple endpoints and multiple areas that you're going to focus on. And so technical writers are going to be able to say, yes, this API already covers this data set. We can already, you don't need to rebuild that. Have you talked to team X or team Y? Or this API is returning that data for you. Or maybe you've skipped something or whatever it is. So that's another way that technical writers can kind of help. As well as we have external domain knowledge. So not only the APIs you're building within your company, but maybe there's an API that's already built that would be cheaper to purchase and bring into your company rather than go out and rebuild that product. Or maybe there's something that you can reach into another API and pull that product back, or pull that data back so that you don't need to rewrite the wheel. So we can kind of help in multiple facets along the way. So that's my sales pitch of why we should use technical writers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about actually planning a project and actually working with them. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of how to work with technical writers. I surveyed my teams. I kind of looked around, and this is kind of what we came up with. You might have different experiences, but this is part of the process that we did. And this is the part where you're going to do the planning before the writer even comes on board. So one of the things you need to think about is, what are the problems you're trying to solve? You have a new endpoint and nobody knows about it and you're trying to document it. Perhaps your support team is being overwhelmed with questions about edge cases or whatever it is, and you need to solve those problems. Maybe users are getting stuck halfway through the journey and giving up. Maybe people are trying to get the information out there, or whatever it is. So these are the challenges that you need to solve and that you need to think about while you're creating your documentation. So these are the things that you want to actually target when you're working with a technical writer. So these are what we're going to call objectives. They'll come into play in a minute here. So as we go through and start planning the project, the next thing we want to do, and this is something I don't see enough of, so this is why I'm going to mention it, is create a culture that recognizes documentation within your teams and within your company. So add the documentation to your team goals. At Google, we use something called OKRs, Objective Key Results, and we make documentation a team goal, not only within product teams, but within actually projects themselves. So I actually have a bit that I can flip, so I can approve when the launch is going to go. So this gives me a little bit of power to say, okay, the docs aren't ready, we're going to hold, or we're going to go. So this is a way to include that technical writer in the team. So maybe your team has a similar, maybe your company has a similar type system. Include that, the technical writers in your system there. You're also going to want to allocate your engineering resources to the project. So these are the people who are going to help the technical writer get up to speed. They're going to answer their questions. They're going to maybe get them all the resources they need. They're going to be able to work with the technical writer throughout the length of the project. Make sure that this engineer or several engineers have time in their schedule to work with the technical writer. These engineers should also be recognized for their work. So maybe you're going to give them a peer bonus or whatever it is, but these people who are going out of their way to actually work with technical writers should be recognized. Everything needs to be documented and everything should be tracked. So you probably want to create a bug or some kind of ticket in your system for your project. So make sure that everything, every doc project that I do gets a ticket. This way I can, at the end of the year, I can see I solved 100 bugs or 1,000 bugs or whatever it's going to be. Everything should get a ticket so that you can keep track and you can assign various portions to people. And then you're going to determine the scale of your content. So you're going to start drafting your content probably in a shared doc, but then you're going to start determining the scale of that content. Large project, small project. Large projects are probably going to need to bring technical writers in early. Smaller projects, probably not so much. Maybe you can leave them closer to the end. Then you're going to start requesting the writer. Larger companies have writing teams. At Google, we have probably about 300 to 400 technical writers. But given that we probably have 100,000 software engineers, give or take, I don't know what the exact number is, that's a fairly small ratio. Maybe your team doesn't, or maybe your company doesn't have a technical writer. Maybe you need to go out and get a contracting agency to help you find a technical writer. Again, things you need to think about when you're launching your project, because you can't just turn around and hire a writer. And then finally, you need to figure out what the resources are. You need to figure out what they need: computers, users' accounts, existing documentation, and the like. So this is something we kind of came up with. So we looked at this, and this is something that we've often seen at Google. This is the doc project life cycle. Three rows here: planning, writing, and reviewing. So the planning stage we're kind of talking about right now. The writing stage is where the technical writer is going to go off and start drafting the content. And then the reviewing stage, which is last but definitely not least, and we'll touch on this in a second, is very important. So, and keep in mind that some of these rows might iterate several times before you start moving on to the next row. So what to expect during a doc project. So this is now, you've kind of planned it out as a team. You know you need to document something. Maybe you're having a major, a new endpoint that's launching. Maybe it's a whole brand new API, or maybe it's a small sub feature that you want to document. This is where you're now going to bring the writer on board. So you're going to have an official kickoff meeting. You're going to bring the writer on board. You've either hired somebody or you've got your request out from a writing manager and they gave you a writer for your project. So in this meeting, you're going to want to start talking about timelines, expectations, what the goal of the project is. You're going to need to give them the overview of the product. You want to tell them what the product is going to do, who the users are, everything that the writer is going to need to know. And you want to try and be as specific as possible. So when you tell the writer, you don't want to tell them, oh, it's just some developers using a REST API. Maybe it's going to be developers using a REST API in large medical settings, and they're going to be talking, it's going to be data that's going to be pulled by doctors, or whatever the information is going to be. You want to be as specific as possible. You're going to take that list of objectives that you used in the previous section, and you're going to start pulling that in so that the writer can start drafting the skeleton of the projects, of the skeleton of the documentation. So this is where they're going to actually start saying, okay, we need an overview. We're going to need several how-to guides. We're going to need the reference documentation. We're going to need troubleshooting. We're going to need an OAuth guide. Whatever it's going to be, you're going to start talking through all those things. And as the leader of the project, you're going to also know the timelines. So you're going to know the deadline when everything needs to be delivered. So you're going to want to know, you're going to start working back from that deadline. So you're going to know what the milestones are. So you need to know when certain things are deliverable, and you're going to start working back from that area. Collaboration. So again, this is a team effort. The technical writer is now joining your team. What's the best way for everyone to work together? Stakeholders, collaborators, contributors, how are we all working together? How are we going to sync? Should we sync? How often? Emails, meetings, bi-weekly, weekly, all of these things need to be thought about. And then writers are going to have questions. So how is the writer going to get in touch with you? Are you going to start a chat space and everyone's going to pile into the chat space? Are they going to email you at the end of the day? Do you prefer interruptions as you go, or save up the questions for the end of the day? So these things you need to start thinking about. And if the writer is maybe within the team, or if it's a very large project that's going to span months or quarters, maybe you start embedding them into your project. So you're going to start inviting them to your sprint meetings, your scrum meetings, your lunches, your celebrations, your offsites. Make them part of the team so that they can actually contribute. The other thing, keep good notes. Start writing things down when you're collaborating. What are the action items that you want people to do so that you can actually go back to them and make sure people are following through on what they're doing? And then finally, what's the project tracker tool? Probably most companies have one. If it's going to be something with Jira, or you're going to use a spreadsheet, or whatever it's going to be, make sure that somebody has that tool so that you can actually start keeping track of things and make sure that somebody can keep it updated. The next step is help the writer get started. You're going to have a ton of information that, that you've drafted or created before the writer even comes on board. This could be stuff like PRDs and UX mocks and emails and white papers and all of that kind of stuff that's just been floating around. Make sure the writer has access to that. Make sure the writer is invited to any email groups or chat spaces, that they have the right account permissions to see everything that you're sharing with them. And then in the first week, you're probably going to want to work through with them to make sure that they can get up and running. If you have QA testers, perhaps they have some kind of test documentation that you can share with them so that they can actually start seeing how this works. If you're doing anything UI-based, you want to share a sandbox with them so they can actually start looking at this. Or if you're only doing API reference documentation, make sure they have access to the code so they can actually see what the exact wording of the error messages are, or whatever it is that you need to do. And then as you start working through, if your processes aren't well documented and somebody needs to create a CL or change list or a push into your repos, if that's not documented, you're going to have to sit down with them and tell them how to actually do that. What tags do you need? Who are you going to include on your reviews? All of that information. And then if your product isn't well spelled out, you're going to need to sit down and explain the product, how this thing actually works, how the API calls are working. Perhaps you want to do that over individual meetings, video conferencing, emails. Again, things to think about because you're going to have to bring the technical writer up to speed. We talked about SMEs already, but again, you're probably going to want to make sure that those SMEs are available to you. And again, these could be the same SMEs that you talked about in the previous section, but you just want to make sure that those SMEs still have time to actually work with the technical writer and they can start doing all of this stuff. Then the writing's going to happen. So this graph kind of talks a little bit about how the writer is going to get on board here. So you're going to need to start drafting the writer, or bringing the writer up to speed. Technical writer is going to come on board. And then as they start drafting, they're probably going to kind of go away for a bit. They're going to start drafting their documentation. They're going to be on their own a little bit. And then you're going to start seeing more ramping up as drafts come back in. And this is where you're going to need to start doing your technical reviews. And this is where that iterative cycle is going to come into play. So technical reviews, last but not least, this is one of the main areas, and this is something that I want to impart upon you. If you don't remember anything else about this, technical reviews are the most important part of this whole process. So technical reviews should be done by the engineers. Again, these could be the SMEs. They could be other people as well you could bring in. So the SMEs could be just the people answering the questions, but then maybe this is where you want to bring in legal or marketing or the tech leads who don't have time just to answer the one-off questions. So these are the people who are going to actually review your documentation. It should be treated exactly like a code review. It should be detailed at that level. If something is wrong, explain why it's wrong. If we're making assumptions in that piece of documentation, we might be making assumptions in other parts of the documentation, and we can go and quickly fix that. So explain why something is wrong, definitely. And then finally, we'll give you a deadline for this tech review. Please adhere to the deadline, because if you delay getting the reviews back, that means it's going to delay the projects, and then the project it'll tumble from there. Don't skimp on this step. Great content is impossible without good code reviews. So please act on this. So finally, after all the time spent on the project, the docs are going to launch. You're going to do a formal announcement. You're going to thank everybody. But if the technical writer is embedded in the team, you're going to need to figure out how those docs are going to be updated. Because if you've hired a vendor and they're going to go away, you're going to need to pass that off to the team. So somebody on the team is going to need to take care of that. That's going to be a doc caretaker. So that person's going to be the person who's going to take care of it, and they're going to go through and work through all of this. A couple of quick things, because I know I'm running short on time. What to avoid when working with the technical writer. We're under immense time pressures. So if you need to actually change some of the deadlines, you need to let us know ASAP. So if you need to shorten those deadlines, perhaps all we can do is review the reference docs and get a release note out, and then we'll do a bunch of fast follows after that. If things are going to lengthen, this gives us more time to work on other projects, and then we can come back to your stuff. But this is important. You need to kind of keep us in the loop and make sure that we're online. The other thing is, if you have a document that you want the editor, the writer to edit, and if it's not pertinent to the project, we probably don't need to edit it. But if you've drafted something that's pertinent to the project, please share that. So and if you're taking too long on a tech review, you're gonna delay the project again, or if you disregard our advice. Again, we have tons of experience, so if we're telling you or asking you to do certain things, please take our advice. So in this talk, we talked briefly about planning the project, planning the resources for the project. You wanna make sure that you have engineering time that can actually do this, that you can actually work with the technical writer. You wanna provide a good foundation of the experience and the expectations. You want to make sure that you're gonna expect interruptions, that the technical writer is gonna come and talk to you, and you wanna create that respectful relationship. So finally, I think this is a really good quote, so I'll just leave you with this. Technical writing is a continuous process of learning, carefully gathering, sifting, organizing, and assessing, all while trying to craft something that makes sense for a user. So you can see that there's more to just writing and editing when it comes to technical writing. So thank you very much.